Guess who's on the phone? He's in private practice as an attorney at Douglas Hicks Law in Los Angeles, among his many honors being named Trial Lawyer of the Year for 2006 by the Consumer Attorneys Association, the largest local association of plaintiffs' attorneys from the United States. He's probably one of our most famous civil rights attorneys. I'm talking about Attorney Carl Douglas. Good morning.
Good morning, Dom. It's always a pleasure to join you and your listeners on the front page.
We are talking Derek Chauvin. We're talking the local law enforcement and taking your phone calls. 520-5554. Add your area code on the front, 520-KJLH, and you are in. Attorney Douglas, we already have some folks on the phone this morning, so if you don't mind, let's turn to some of them.
Let's do it.
We've got an anonymous caller from Rancho Cucamonga. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Dominique, for your show.
Thanks for calling.
Yeah, I wanted to ask what kind of effect you think it would have if we start, participating in the jury. Because the jury it just always seems like there's not no people of color, no representation on the jury either when it comes to trial situations.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of attorneys complain about that. I think it's a great point. Attorney Douglas, our anonymous caller says, we need more black people on juries.
Well, first of all, Dominic, that anonymous caller should give his name because that is the number one way everyone who is listening to my voice can play their individual role for justice. Dom, whenever I speak to people in the public, I emphasize two things. One, the importance of voting. And two, the importance when you get that little card in the mail of doing everything you can to take part in the civil and the criminal justice system. One reason why many of these verdicts are so weird and so out of line is because we lawyers of color, don't have the opportunity to speak our truth to individuals on the jury who will listen. All we want, Dom, is for the chance that we will have someone listen to our arguments about why we should prevail, about why the prosecution has failed to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And only when there are people that look like the defendants on trial or the citizens seeking justice can there be any hopes for real justice. And I'll tell you, Dom, when a prosecutor sees a black person walking into a courtroom as a juror, they take on great concern because they know that that person has life experiences that they just won't accept hook, line, and sinker the official narrative, that they have experiences and lifetimes and they've lived in a way that makes it very important for contrary thoughts and themes to resonate among a jury. So it is so very important, and that brother should have said his name.
Yeah, I think, I wish there would be more incentives because a lot of people that do work hourly jobs, they're not compensated. It's more problematic. I feel like that's a built-in inequality in the jury system. Usually, the reimbursement that they give you is not going to cover what you would have gotten at your shift, and so that may be one reason. But I also think people are afraid of being caught up in the criminal justice system. So how can you reassure people that being involved with being on a jury is not going to put them in any kind of danger?
Well, first of all, now, ever since OJ, quite honestly, 27 years ago, all the jurors are anonymous. They have numbers on their badges. They don't often even know each other's names unless they choose to share their names. So there have been great efforts, I'll give it credit, for the system to protect the safety of others. But as important, Dom, and again, I've been a lawyer, girl, for 41 years, okay? And I can say absolutely so. Everyone who takes part in the jury system comes away fascinated, educated, and with a much greater appreciation of both the benefits and the problems of our civil justice system. But everyone comes away enlightened and a better citizen whenever they take part in the system. It's interesting, and they'll find it fascinating, and really taking part will give them a sense of involvement in our America.
Okay, let's go to LD calling us from the city of Inglewood. Good morning, LD.
Good morning to you. Good morning to Stevie. Good morning to the guest, Carl. You guys is dead on time with everything. You true. But one thing about it, did you guys notice that the weekend the white lady that shot at the cops so called, and the cop shot back at her, and she was, I think it was either the park over there by Wilshire. Is it one of the parks, and they shot. She shot at them or they shot at her, and then she got in the water, wading around in the water, and they just waited until she got out. I don't know the outcome of it because I didn't really see the outcome, but this lady wasn't African American, and I said, here it is. You get a brother in Pasadena can get shot in the back, running from a cop, and he was a passenger in the car, and they gonna shoot him thinking that he got a gun. Now, how is it that this lady, who's not African-American, could be floating, shot at a cop now? Now, if that was a black person that shot at a cop, do you think he would get a chance to wade in the water? And they sit back there and wait till he decided to get out? So it's just straight out racism. And one thing about it, it's not the bad apple that's in the cops, one bad apple or a few bad apples. The bad apples is those that's in the Senate that see what's going on and they're not doing nothing about it. It's the unions that making these laws to make sure that they can get clear with killing us and get away with it. I was listening to Andre Russell one Sunday, and a cop came on, white cop. He said, it's understood with a white cop that he can kill a black person and get away with it. So how is that a few bad apples if you got a law where they can say it among their own selves that if I'm white, I can shoot a black person? Even though you got some white person that can't do it and they don't, the law is still back them up if they decide to want to shoot a black person. So the bad apples is not so many, it's the cops, but the real bad apples is the ones that allow it to happen. And it's racism in the court system, too. I have been on many jury duties, and I see how if it's two white attorneys and it's a black person, they would make sure that not many black people get on that case. I got off of they threw me off of so many cases after they interviewed me, and I'm a law-abiding citizen. I work at FedEx. I had a good job, and they was kicking me off of cases.
Yeah, I've seen it. I mean, we saw that with the Derek Chauvin trial. It seemed like they were asking about Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter and really trying to weed out if they were going to get, black people, making sure that they were somehow connected to law enforcement. So what about that, Attorney Carl Douglas? I mean, he's talking about the roles of lawmakers, the unions, which I call cartels because they function more like cartels than what we think of as unions. And the judicial system. I mean,
Dom, first of all, what the brother says is, of course, correct. Racism is institutional, and it is so in law enforcement as well. When you think about the historical nature of law enforcement, how it goes back to slavery days and how the slave catchers were really the first police officers, is there really any wonder how there is still institutionalized racism in our very system of justice? However, I don't throw up my hands and say, oh, well, I can't do anything to change it. I have trained as a lawyer to be able to look at both sides of an issue and to be able to represent either side of an issue. And I choose hopefulness. I choose to continue to battle in this space. And to that brother, I would tell him to continue serving on juries, to continue taking part in the political system, giving money when you can to good candidates, going out to forums and voting, because that is the way that we can make change. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I say, go it to the ballot box, do it in the jury box, and walking down the streets and protesting. We need all of that heat to make these changes that are needed. But I'm hopeful, Dom. I'm not going to say, woe is me, and just throw up my hands and give up. I'm continuing to fight for justice for black and brown people in America.
I hadn't seen this story, LD. This woman he's talking about had a gun. She was at MacArthur Park, and the police were chasing her, so she went into the pond there. I guess she's nicknamed the Mermaid. It says that they did open fire, but she got out unscathed. I mean, they took her into custody, and she did not die. So your point is definitely taken.
Well, Dominic, you can only go back to January the 6th, my sister, and understand the different treatments of black and brown people and white people to understand the reality of it. Because everybody listening on this call right now would agree that if there had been BLM protesters having the audacity to think about storming the Capitol, there would have been lives that were drawn and blood that was drawn on the steps. They would never have gotten to the scaffolding. They would never have gotten to the barriers pushing against the cops. It would have been a much different outcome if the faces of those protesters had been browner and blacker in hue.
Very true. Very true. Let's go to Pam calling us from Inglewood. Welcome, Pam.
Hey, good morning, Front Page family.
Morning. Go ahead.
I'm a first-time caller, too.
Oh, good. Good.
Glad years and years.
Yeah.
I've been following the trial somewhat, and one thing keeps popping up is, and I want to ask the attorney, was his take on it, because they keep saying we have so many these black jurors that's been selected, but the voices to me sound like they're black, but they're of some other African descent, but not like African American. And I know, just from experience, they have a different experience than an actual African American person that's born and raised, in the neighborhood. So how do they put that, label them as, black, but we know that it's kind of a different thing.
I understand what you're saying. You don't feel like a person can truly relate to being African American if they're African or maybe some other cultural group. But even within the African American community, you've got a range, right? You have your Ben Carsons and such. Do you take that into account, Attorney Carl Douglas? What Pam is talking about?
The Constitution says that you have a right to have a jury of your peers. And as I always say, Dom, in science, 2 + 2 is 4. In math, 2 + 2 is 4. But in law, 2 + 2 is somewhere between 3 and 5. Every answer in law, it depends. And in law, the peers are not 12 brothers who are from my hood in South L.A. The peers are people that are selected usually by the voting rolls, and there's not any particular preference given to your age, to your background economically, or to your background politically. So long as they are selected from an unbiased cross-section of the community, it is considered to be peers. In Minnesota, there happens to be a very large international African community. There's a large Somali community. There's a large Muslim community. And it may well be that some of the brown-skinned jurors that are there, and I think there are 3 at least, or 4, at least half-raced, are brown-skinned. And that image, I think, is important. You may not have someone who grew up in Houston and came to Minnesota for a new life like George Floyd. But as long as there are people there that in some way reflect the diversity of the country, that's all I can ask for. They're not going to get 12 black folks from Minnesota sitting on a jury. That's never going to happen. The prosecution or the defense would never let it happen. However, so long as there's a fair cross-section and that there are 3 brown people of color, for me, is a good sign. I'll take that.
All right, let's go to Eric calling us from Pasadena. Morning, Eric.
Morning. How you doing?
Good, good. What's on your mind?
Hey, when the police were formed, they were formed to capture slaves. I mean, that was their job. They were here to capture us any means necessary, dead or alive. It didn't make a difference. So the mentalities of us being inferior to them is always going to be there. I mean, that's just it's woven into the police. And also on the George Floyd's case, the police officer, my understanding is he knew George, and they worked together on security at a club. So how does he, act like he doesn't know him and kills him?
Right. So, we've had a conversation about, the overseer or slave catcher legacy of the police department. I don't know that if police departments, I don't know that you can have that conversation enough. I do think it's interesting also the issue you're bringing up about the Officer Chauvin supposedly knowing George Floyd. They both worked at the same nightclub. The woman that owned the club mentioned that, they knew each other, but Chauvin has denied that he knew him. And I wonder if this will come up at all during the course of this case. It looks like it's not going to. You have thoughts on that, Attorney Douglas?
Oh, Dom, it's going to be the role of Chauvin's lawyer to throw everything against the wall and to see what sticks. Because that's what his role is. I'm sure that the prosecution did not offer him and his lawyer a particular resolution that they would accept. They had little to lose, so they have to go to trial. And by going to trial, they have to challenge everything, claiming that there was a crowd distraction, that he was struggling, that his heart is enlarged, that he had fentanyl in his system. That is typical and the way that he has to really perform. So none of that is really very surprising. I suspect, guys, that there will be a conviction to some charge of Derek Chauvin. Probably that third-degree murder is going to be a compromise verdict. And at the same time, I don't think any of the other 3 officers are ever going to be convicted. I have found jurors are very, very reluctant to convict officers that are not the main actor. Bystander responsibility is a concept that jurors are not just willing to accept and to hold an officer criminally liable for watching or failing to interfere when someone is using excessive force. So the guys on the arms or the legs that didn't restrict the breathing into his heart are probably not going to be convicted. The Asian cop standing over his shoulder, who should have simply tapped him on his shoulder, hey, man, they're filming this. You might want to stop right now. He probably, I also think, will not be convicted of a serious crime. Regrettable, but that's the result I predict is going to happen, and I hope I'm disappointed. And it's more than that.
Yeah, well, truly, we'll see. Those are going to be separate trials, which is interesting. But love getting your take on this. Lots of people on the phones, Attorney Carl Douglas. Lots and lots of folks want to talk to you. But let's start out when we get back talking about a couple of local cases before the time gets away from us. We are the Front Page. We're Radio Free, 102.3 KJLH.